so excited to be here with all of you tonight at the ACEDHH conference. And I'm here to share with you my story and my educational journey, the successes and the struggles, and how I became who I am today, a survivor and a fighter. So Kitabi, hello. My name. Oh, Hoat, let me teach you this, my native sign. Hoat means hello. My name is Sarah Young Bear Brown. My sign name is like this. You may be wondering why. In my indigenous sign language, the sign for young looks like this, like a child. And the sign for bear is like this because the way a bear moves its paws. So young bear. I used to have a sign growing up that was kind of a boring, basic sign of S and B of my initials for my English name, but I really wanted to recognize my native heritage. So my sign name now that I use is based on indigenous sign language for young bear. I grew up here, well, not here, I guess we're in Nebraska, but just across the way in Iowa is where I grew up. So I'm a neighbor to Nebraska. I lived in Iowa my entire life. Everyone in my family is hearing, except for myself and 2 cousins and my daughter, who is now 5 years old. So let me start at the beginning. When I was born, as I mentioned, everyone in my family was hearing. And when they found out I was deaf, my mother, who's an educator, was very proactive and reached out and said, I have an 8-month-old daughter who is deaf. Tell me what I need to do. Luckily, the person was able to refer her somewhere where she could learn sign language, the local community college. My mom jumped right in. And we learned together as I grew. She learned sign language as I learned sign language. The community college teacher would come over to our house and work with my mom and the other members of my family. And I was just a little tiny baby at the time. And my family was learning sign language along with me as I grew. I feel incredibly lucky to have a family who had learned sign language for me. That is uncommon. I recognize how rare that is and how blessed I truly am because of that. As I grew, began to start school, my mom put me in the local public school program. But the school had no experience with having deaf students, so they didn't really know what to do. And my mom realized that it wasn't a good fit for me. I wasn't receiving an education. We were spending too much time struggling with trying to break down barriers and figure out how to help the school learn to educate a deaf child. My mom did some research, proactive as she was, and found out about the Iowa School for the Deaf and all of the resources that they had to educate deaf children. However, my home in Tama, Iowa, is 5 hours from the Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs. But Tama is where the Meskwaki Nation is, which is my tribe. And we have a rich cultural connection in our community. And oftentimes Native folks will hear or will have used the word reservation for where we live. But reservation is not the appropriate concept. Sometimes it will be shortened to res, but where we live is a settlement. The Meskwaki Nation is a settlement. It's land that we have. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But my tribe of the Meskwaki is the only tribe who has a settlement in the entire United States, right over in Iowa. Because my people are very savvy business people. So we came from the East Coast, following the rivers along through the Midwest, to the Midwest, arriving in Iowa and seeing the beautiful landscape, feeling connected to our home, the Iowa state government told us to leave, that they had no room for us and we did not belong. And so we were forced to move to Kansas. We were a nomadic people, horse people. And Kansas was just not suited for our culture and traditions. Iowa was better suited. So we ended up selling all of the horses, taking the money from the sale of our horses, approaching the Iowa state government with our money and saying, we want to buy this land. And the government had never had an offer like that before. And they took the opportunity to make a little money and sell some land, and we settled in Tama and grew the land, lived according to our traditions and our culture, and started from scratch. It's kind of funny, we had to buy our land back, buy our own land back, which is a ridiculous thing I could go into more deeply, but that's the history of how we ended up in Iowa. So as I mentioned, the Meskwaki tribe has a rich history and culture. I'm going to share with you my name in Meskwaki. It's T-Ki-Megia. And what that means is woman standing on the edge of a river. So that is my Meskwaki name that my grandfather gave to me from his family. So I have two names. I have my American name, Sarah Bear Brown, and my Meskwaki name, Tika Magia. And I hope to legally change my name, potentially keep the young bear, but follow my Meskwaki name. And who knows? It's something that I want to do, and we'll see. Usually when I want something, I can make it happen. So, growing up in my family, following the Meskwaki cultural ways, for example, having our traditional feasts, we have 7 different clans. There's a fishing clan, different clans. I'm the fishing clan of the Meskwaki. There are 574 Meskwaki tribes and various tribes across the United States, and each of those have their various cultural traditions and ways that they practice and live in their culture. But my family raised me in the Meskwaki tradition, and I learned to behave culturally and traditionally in the Meskwaki ways, as well as using the language and communication approaches of the Meskwaki tribe. But as I said, when I entered school, my mom realized that the Iowa School for the Deaf was the best place for me to get my education. I had to leave my tribal family and travel all the way across the state to Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs. And I was 4 years old at the time. And I still remember that day. It's hard to believe that a 4-year-old can remember something, but I was terrified. I didn't see any other Native people there. I had grown up within my Native community and been with other Native folks, and now I was suddenly out in this other community, this other world where I didn't see other Native people, and I was terrified. I would not show my face to anyone. I hid behind my mother, and I hid my face from anyone because I didn't know anybody, and I was terrified, a terrified little 4-year-old. And eventually my family left, and they went back to Tama, and I was shown the dorm, and I cried and cried. I wanted to go home. I didn't want to be away from my family that I knew. But I am so thankful for Iowa School for the Deaf. I'm so glad that I was there. I'm so glad that my family made the decision to have me there, because that changed my life. The people there understood what it was like. They were not Native, they were white. But we shared the culture and values of being deaf, and they saw me as a young deaf child and welcomed me into their school into the community and introduced me to sign language and deaf culture. I realized there were other people in the world who were deaf, other people like me. And I grew to love that school as a second home. And I was different than my classmates because I was Native, but I was the same as them because we were all deaf. When I was about 6 or 7, there's something happened that I'll never forget. My mom came to the school and brought me this beautiful regalia called a jungle dress. It's a beautiful traditional dress that is covered in beads. It's called a healer. So my mom brought me one from back home. And I felt so much pride that day. I wore it to school and went to every classroom, even the ones that weren't mine, walked in and waved at everyone and said, "Look at my beautiful dress." I was so proud of who I was as a young Native deaf girl. I felt beautiful and powerful. And I don't think I stopped smiling that entire day. And then something interesting happened because my classmates started asking me questions about my culture. So that was a happy experience. But then, just a short time later, when I was 8, I had my first encounter with racism. A boy came up to me and said, "I hate Indians." And I didn't really know what that meant. And this is back when they used the old sign for Native American, the one that looked like the feathers, the headdress, which is no longer used anymore. But he said, "I hate Indians," and he tried to poke me with a stick. And it was a hearing boy that was, and I had a friend with me who could hear and knew sign language and told me what he said because I didn't know what he was saying to me. And then I started to feel very confused. I didn't understand how he could hate me. I was 8 years old. I didn't know what to do. It was the first time I had ever encountered something like that face to face. And I started to question the way that I looked, the way that I behaved, and I thought, I felt shame. I didn't like the way my skin looked or my hair. And as I've grown, I've known to value and learned to value my culture and who I am as a person. But that planted a seed of doubt in me. Years later, when I was about 12, I went into the dorm at the school for the deaf, and I had my first period, and I had no idea that it was coming. I didn't know about that special time that girls have when they are becoming women and their bodies are changing. I had no frame of reference. I didn't know what to expect, and I was scared. At the Iowa School for the Deaf, they have people there called house parents. They work in the dorms with the children. So I went and got that person, and I called them into my room and showed them that I had started menstruating, and I was kind of embarrassed, but they were so excited. They acted very excited, and they were like, "Oh, congratulations, you're becoming a woman, you're growing up, it's so exciting." And I was not excited, and I was confused. And so the house parent saw how serious I was, and I said, "I want you to call my mom right now." And the dorm parent was very confused about why she needed to call my mom. And so I called my mom and explained what had happened, and my mom explained to me our cultural tradition. She knew that it was coming, and so she explained to me how the Meskwaki culture handles this time in a young girl's life. I went to the health center, and my mom drove all the way from Tama, 4 hours, to come and see me. And she looked at me and had such a sweet face and said, "Oh, you're no longer my baby girl anymore." My sister was there too, and she was giving me like little eye rolls and little snarky face expressions. But according to our tradition, we have to wear certain garments and cover ourselves because the sunlight cannot touch us during that time. So my mom brought me a coat and a hat and a blanket and gloves, and it was not cold outside. And I had to go and wait in the car and sit all the drive home and make sure that the sun didn't touch my skin. So 4 hours in the car. We put blankets over the windows, and then when I got home, I had to sit in a room without allowing the sun or the moon to touch my skin for 4 days. And I also was not allowed to see my dad or any of my male relatives, my cousins. I could only see the women in my family and the girls in my family during that special time. Because I was on a mission. I was becoming a woman. So the women in my family brought me gifts and celebrated with me. I could only eat once a day. And I remember asking my mom if I could eat more, and she reminded me of our tradition that I could only eat once a day. And I was very hungry and complained so much. But then at midnight, she snuck me a little bit of a snack. And the next day, she knew that that was the end of my 4 days, and we would have a celebration with the family. So I continued to learn about my Meskwaki tradition. For example, we do not eat seafood, we don't eat fish. So my mom told the school to plan for in the cafeteria any days that they were planning on serving seafood or seafood type dishes, that they had some other option for me. Because even though it was my school and my home, my mom didn't want me to lose who I was as a Native person. And I know that it was a difficult choice for them to send me to the school for the deaf, but it's the best choice, I feel, that my mom ever made for me. It changed my life, and I am forever thankful and grateful to her for making that difficult decision. After high school, I didn't want to go to college. I was sick of living in a dorm and sick of being away from my people. So I went back home to Tama. I really wanted to be around my Native family and to learn more about our history and our culture and explore that part of my identity and who I was. So as I had mentioned, we have feasts as part of our traditional celebrations. We have them what's called a wickiup. It's basically like a big barn with a fire inside and a long table that goes through the center of the building, and then people sit along there to eat. The other side of the room is where the food is prepared. So we start cooking for the feast at 3 in the morning. Doesn't matter if it's winter or summer, we start at 3 a.m. preparing the food for the feast that will happen later in the day. And we don't use electricity, we use fire. We do things the old-fashioned way. We bring in the meat to be butchered. And I remember when I moved back home that my family taught me how to do that. They never ever left me out. They wanted me to understand, and they wanted me to learn to be a part of the tradition. Not only would we do the different steps, my family would explain to me how to do them properly and what the symbolism was and the reason behind each of the steps. So for example, the way that we would place the wood in the fire had to be placed a specific way. One log facing to the west and one log facing to the east to follow the path of the sun. So I learned about the rules of our tradition. The things that we've done for years and years, and that we will continue to do. Another tradition is if someone in the family passes away, that for 4 days after their death, before we have the recognition of their passing, we honor them by canceling any celebrations, no powwows, no meetings, no events. We don't look in the mirror, and we turn inward and focus on each other. We spend time as a family to honor them. So going to Iowa School for the Deaf, we learned history, but I didn't learn Native history. Of course, I learned this story that all school children learned back when I was growing up about the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving and that stuff, but I didn't really learn the history of my people, the real history of my people, and what happened from 1492 and after, and all of the atrocities that my people experienced. I didn't learn about that until my mother gave me a book when I was older, and I was upset. I said, how could I not know this? How could nobody have told me? How do the people around me hide this from me? And I didn't realize that they didn't know either. So by this time I was an adult and social media was a thing, and I decided that I was going to make a vlog and share all of this information with folks. That the story of Thanksgiving that we were all taught is not true. And it's been several years ago now, so that information has gotten out there. And as far as for me and my friends and the people who have learned about that, many of us no longer recognize the American holiday of Thanksgiving. We don't celebrate that way. I feel personally that it's an insult to celebrate that day because the day really celebrates the hiding of the true history of what my people have gone through. Another thing that I realized as I was growing up is that I have a responsibility as a person who is a deaf Native woman to share the knowledge that I have with the rest of the deaf community and with other people. And that's why I'm here with you, is to share my story and to share my experiences, because I feel that I have an obligation to do that. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. It's an investment. And I'm involved in lots of things. I wear many hats, but my work is nowhere near done. And this will be what I spend the rest of my life doing. I originally went to college in Bismarck, North Dakota, at a trade school, a technical college. And I still wanted to stay involved with Indigenous communities, so I found a technical college that was in a community that had strong Native roots, and it was difficult. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't know about the community, and when I arrived, they had no interpreter for me. So I tried to get through my classes without an interpreter, and I made it, but I didn't excel. If I had had an interpreter, my grades might have been higher, my GPA might have been better. But on top of that, I was lonely. I didn't have any other deaf people around me. I didn't have any other, there were Native people there, but they were all hearing and from different tribes. So after I graduated, I went home. And I wanted to stay there. And my cousin was there, and he was sick at the time, and I wanted to stay there to be with my family and to help take care of him, and I did not want to go back to school. It was very difficult for me to be in school, and it wasn't enjoyable, and I didn't feel like it was something I wanted to do. So while I was back home, I met my wonderful husband, Mason, who's also a deaf Native man, and how rare is that? I feel so blessed and lucky to have found someone who is Native like me and deaf like me, and who fell in love with me. And now we have 2 beautiful babies together. My son was born, he's hearing, so he's a CODA, child with 2 deaf parents. And then my daughter was born, and she is deaf, Maya, my flower. And I will never forget when she was born. I was frustrated. I was at the University of Iowa Hospital, when my daughter was born, she was beautiful and healthy. And the doctor came in and they did the hearing screening that they do for all newborns. And the doctor smiled at me and said, well, your daughter failed the hearing test and recommend that we get her signed up to get cochlear implants. And I said, no, she didn't fail it, she's deaf. They did some more screenings a couple of days later. And by this time it was the third time and she failed. They did it a fourth time and she failed. They did it a fifth time. And I said, she is deaf, hello. So after 5 times, I refused to let them to continue to test my daughter. 5 times is more than enough. It's kind of funny because my husband and I were thrilled, we were happy. You know, many parents are shocked or sad when their baby is deaf, but we were happy, we were excited. And my son is hearing, and we're so blessed, and I love him very much. And I love both of my children, they're both beautiful. But the experience of when my son was born and when my daughter was born were so different because of my daughter's deafness. And the pressure that was put on me by the doctor and the other people at the hospital to get a cochlear implant for her. And when we would go for her pediatric appointments, they would bring it up every single time until I had had enough. And I told the pediatrician, do not ask me ever again. And they finally stopped. But my God, it was enough. I had to be firm because it was just this constant attitude that being deaf is bad news. It was incredibly frustrating. This last fall, I took my daughter in for a doctor's appointment, a regular checkup, and the doctor asked my daughter, a 4-year-old, if she wanted to get cochlear implants. And I had already told this pediatrician not to ask me, and now they asked my daughter. I was livid. So please, tell people to offer things. Don't recommend cochlear implants and focus only on that. Offer support, offer classes, offer resources. Look at deaf parents as parents. The struggles that I've had to go through as a deaf person and as a parent of a deaf person that I cannot believe are still happening in 2022. And looking at what my daughter will go through as she grows up. So, I was still living in Tama with my family, and my daughter was getting ready to be school-aged. So we tried the mainstreaming approach. We tried putting her in the local school. The interpreter that they provided was just not a good match for my daughter. She was not qualified. And my daughter did not want to sign at school. No matter how much the teacher tried to get her to sign, I tried to get her classmates to learn some sign language. I went for a school pageant that they had, and I noticed that she wasn't signing in front of her classmates. She wouldn't even sign the sign for applause. She didn't sign things that I knew she knew sign language for, and so I knew something was wrong. She wasn't happy. She didn't feel like she could express herself or be herself, and it reminded me of when I was young. So I remember what my mom did and the difficult decision that she made. And I thought, Iowa School for the Deaf is the best place for my daughter, but I have the ability to move with her. So we as a family moved to Council Bluffs. And it was night and day how my daughter behaved at school. She's laughing, she's having animated conversations, she's thriving. And I am so happy. So let me tell you a little bit about the work that I do. I've done a lot of advocacy in the deaf Indigenous community. I started an organization called Gathering of Deaf Natives. And you can follow us on Facebook to see what we do, but really it's just for deaf native folks to get together, network, support each other. I was involved in the Standing Rock protest. I've done a lot of advocacy regarding protecting Mother Earth. I also did the Dakota Access Pipeline protest in North Dakota. The Standing Rock protest. We had 6 interpreters that came and volunteered their time, and about 50 to 60 deaf people came to join the protest, and we stood together and fought to protect Mother Earth. That was an incredibly life-altering experience, such a rich experience. I'm so glad that I decided to go. I've also been involved in the Line 3 protest. Sorry, my signs decided to stop working there for a second. So that's in Minnesota, and we went last summer. I also went to Washington, D.C. as part of presentation protests that they had there about the oil pipeline. I've been involved in lots of environmentalist activism because we only have one planet, we only have one Earth. I'm also the vice chair for the Iowa Democratic Party for the last 2 years. I have learned so much about politics. Woo! So much so that I decided to go back to school, which I thought I would never ever do. So now I'm at Iowa Western Community College getting my political science degree, and then I will transfer to UNO, the University of Nebraska at Omaha, to continue my political science journey. Because someday I will run for office. I've already decided that I am going to be a representative for my people. That is my dream. So thank you so much for letting me share with you tonight.